Hey guys, let me just get myself all organized. I'll give you a few minutes to jump on because I'm running late. I just finished with a client, so I was running a little bit late, just going over on that. But I'm here now. So when you jump on, say hi, let me know you're here. And if you're drinking anything special, let me know what you're drinking. I'm just going to message my husband and tell him to fill up my water bottles. I've got 2 empty water bottles here, and I would like some water because I'm going to be talking. Okay, so say hi when you jump on. Let me know you're here. Okay. So 3 people here. Awesome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So tonight's session is, again, it's the pre-learning for Divinely Nourished. And we're going to be talking about toxicity of the mind. And toxicity of the mind, I think, is one of those concepts that's really interesting to me. And I've been dancing and playing with, what is the toxicity of the physical realm that we live in? What is the toxicity of the spiritual or the soul that we're experiencing? And what is the toxicity of the mind that we're surrounded by? And so I've been kind of dancing with what belongs in what box, and some of it crosses over. So some of what's happening in our mind crosses over into our soul and spirit, and some of what crosses over into our physical. Hey, Tanya, nice to see you here. And thank you for calling me a treasure. I love it. So the ideas and the concepts of these 3 things actually dance and intertwine together. Like, one is not completely void of the other. What's happening in the physical is also happening in the mental and the emotional. And what I see with my clients, and I see with myself all the time, is that we have to do this dance of untangling and untwining what's belonging to what, and fixing all 3 of those as we actually move forward to moving into divine health. And divinely nourished is that whole process. It's that whole process of really digging into, like, what are the emotional blocks that are there? What are the wounds, or the deep wounds of the soul, or the deep nights or the dark nights of the soul that actually are there? And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the spiritual element. But when we're talking about the mind, we're talking more about the messages that we are receiving on a really regular basis. So as I was writing this chapter in the book, my husband is like a movie buff and music buff. Like, he loves music. He can tell me that who sung what song, and like, he probably knows some of the chords in it and a bit of the lyrics and all of that type of stuff. I wouldn't have a clue. I have no clue, except for, really famous people like Michael Jackson. Other than that, I'm pretty like not knowing who they actually are, what songs that they have created. I'm not that much into music. So it's really interesting for us because he's really into music. And as I was sitting there writing this chapter in the book, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, it's like this. Here's the concept, Ben. One of the elements of the toxicity in the mind is sometimes we listen to music, and the actual words of that music is really, really not good for us. Like, it's really, damaging to us. It's creating limiting beliefs. It's doing all of those types of things. But yet we sing it because the beat is good. And just as we were having this conversation, we were also watching a movie, because, like, I'm a multitasker, so I generally will have, lots of things going on at the same time. And it kind of helps me concentrate. It's probably why I have 7 kids. In the middle of studying, I had 7 kids running around the house around me. And I still learnt anatomy and physiology by putting my earphones in and just focusing. And kind of helps me focus too. So as we had this movie on, because, like, he's going, come on, it's time to pack away stuff, and I'm like, no, but I just want to write this thing more. And as we were talking through these things, we're listening to this movie that's got Dolly Parton in it, and she's singing, and the song that they're singing is I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough. And I went, like, and he liked it. He's like, this is a really nice tune. And he kind of got the messaging, like, their messaging was a spiritual one, that I'm not enough and I need you, and that you complete me, and that type of stuff. That was the messaging of the song. And I'm like, but they're singing they're not enough. And for me, like, singing that you're not enough it's not enough. It's not good enough, because the messaging that goes into our brain when we're singing songs we actually absorb that much more readily than when we just hear it spoken to us. And especially when we join in on the singing. So when we're singing a song and when it's got rhythm and it's got rhyme, it actually gets into our subconscious more effectively than if we just heard it spoken out loud. And when we're singing songs that actually say things like, I'm not enough, we're actually communicating that to ourselves. When the truth is, it's not that you're not enough. You are more than enough. You were created more than enough. You've always been enough. Just by the fact that you have air in your lungs, you are enough. But if you're singing songs like that and singing words like that, you are subconsciously implanting into your brain that you're not enough. So I hope that you're following this concept. And the concept is that the world that we are surrounded by, from a sensory experience, from a visual experience, from a oral and audio experience, from the messages that we receive through our eyes, are all really important in creating the life that we want to live. Those messages that we could be reading and hearing can be life-sustaining. They can bring abundance. They can guide you and shape you and lead you in ways that make you explore, embrace, grow into spaces that you maybe never thought you could. They can absolutely do that for you. But often what I see is the reverse, where the messages, the visual stimuli, the movies, the radio stations, all of those things quite often are doing the opposite. They're tearing you down, or they're bringing in, messages that are not ones that you would even say to yourself normally. So a perfect example of this is, Ben does it all the time, because he just sings the song and we're sitting in the car and I'm going, what? Like, that's a really dumb song. Like, I'm very good at this. I'm very good at actually like going, well, that person's clearly got codependency problems while they're singing this song, because like the messaging in the song is like very codependent, or you say the exact thing that I need you to say. And it's like, sounds a little bit controlling. I'm a little bit worried about the person singing this song, because no one's going to say the exact thing that you need them to say all of the time. And so it kind of sets you up for a fall. The same with some of those Disney songs as well, or the whole princess stories, like the Disney movies of like the princess has eaten an apple and she's asleep, and then like the dwarves, look after her, and then some knight in shining armor, some random guy who's just come into the woods, has found her asleep and then kisses her. In real life, we might call that a problem. But in the middle of this, Disney story, we go, oh, it's so beautiful. Her knight in shining armor is coming along to save her and keep her safe and protect her and wake her up from this dream, because he's her one true love. And they were meant to be forever together. And what messaging have we taken away from that? When we've heard that story, we've watched that film, or we've connected with the song, what messaging and meaning have we taken away from that? That's the toxicity of the mind. It's what we expose ourselves to when it comes to newspapers, media, television, movies, shows, music, books. All of that can be a part of the toxicity of the mind. And we can set ourselves up to have beautiful stuff that's around us, that's uplifting, that's building, that's, raising us up. Or we can do the opposite, where we can set ourselves up with stuff that's bringing us down, that's creating fear, that's making us afraid of our fellow man. And we can see that in the media at the moment, like it's been probably most of this year, this massive fear story that people are accepting as the truth without questioning any of it, because of what we're bringing into us through the media and through watching films, watching movies, watching the newspaper, listening to radio stations, having the conversations that we have with people, even, is one of the ways that we can be exposed to that toxicity of the mind. And so in order to start moving into that direction of being divinely nourished, we kind of have to take an audit of this stuff. And we have to bring our conscious awareness to what it is that we're putting in our bodies. And by putting in our bodies, like, what are the music that you're listening to? Some of it can absolutely be fantastic and totally, work really well for you. But is all of what you're listening to working really well for you? Is some of it contributing to things like scarcity, this belief of there's not enough money, there's not enough food, there's not enough everything in the world? Is some of it contributing to that? Is some of it contributing to fear or paranoia or relationship breakdown or communication breakdown? Because we've seen a movie, and I remember this in particular, like I was totally a home and away girl. Like we, every night, like clockwork, we'd sit down, we'd have our dinner on our lap, and we would be watching, I know my dad and I at least, were watching Home and Away. And we'd sit there and we watched the whole thing. And I remembered this distinct moment of like just watching this argument that was taking place where she was angry at him, and then, he didn't understand why she was angry because apparently he should have been able to read her mind, and she stormed off, and this whole sort of scenario was taking place. And then I remember being at school kind of almost watching that play out in some of the teen romances that were happening at my school at the time, where they were just doing the thing that they saw on TV, but at no point kind of going, well, does he know why she's angry? Oh no, he should just know why I'm angry. He should just know. He should just be able to read my mind. Why can't he think about me in the way that I think about him? And we missed the communication development there of like, people can't read your mind. If you want something, you need to then move to that place of being an adult and actually asking for the things that you want in your life, versus just expecting that other people will be able to read those messages and just, I've picked up all the signals, I'm able to do it. Instead of going, actually, it's really important as an adult to be able to communicate your own needs and to be able to talk with your partner and your friends and the people that you care about in your life about the things that are really important to you. It's actually an important skill, because it is some of what separates us from animals, but also some of what separates us from being children. Because as children, we're very egotistic. The world revolves around us. We're meant to be that way. We're meant to have the world revolve around us as children. But then as we start to move through our developmental stages, we're meant to also gain things like empathy and awareness of other people, and recognizing that what's happening for me is not happening for you, and that we are two different beings. And while we're connected, we also are separate at the same time. And while we share commonalities, we don't live out the same filters. We don't have the same exact experiences in life that have created the way that we see the world. We're meant to develop that as we grow older. It's part of our brain development. But for a lot of people, they've had some of those wounds of the soul that have taken place in childhood. And when those wounds happen, and they're significant wounds, often that development gets paused. And hopefully they're, aware enough to actually seek help and get the support that they need to move past that and to start doing the healing work of those wounds, which is some of what we're doing here in Divinely Nourished. But hopefully they do that. But essentially what happens is some of your developmental stuff gets paused at that point, and you still stay in that egocentric sort of living where you're thinking that the world is mostly based around you, and that everybody else should be able to understand what you need and what you want and what your boundaries are without asking, without you communicating that. But as we know, that's not what actually happens. We haven't got a magical mind reading sort of, part of our brain that develops that we can suddenly switch on and we kind of go, oh, I know exactly what you want because I've read your mind. We can understand, like we get close to people and we pick up their patterns and we understand what they're, some of that stuff, but not exactly. And unless we actually get to the point of vocalizing it or writing it even, we're not communicating what is happening for us inside, how we think, how we feel, in order to have a negotiation, to talk about, is that actually the truth? Did you mean this when you said that? This is what I heard. Is that actually what you said? Is the meaning of what you're saying the exact meaning that I'm taking from it? And being able to create that clarification. And so when we're talking about the toxicity of the mind, we're talking about it from all of these areas. Hey, Kathy, nice to see you here. And I will definitely keep talking, Tanya. You can't shut me up. It's just how I roll. I'm going to ask you, pop it in the comments. Like, is this resonating for you? Are you starting to see some of this? What do you think? And what do you think about what I'm actually saying? Just going to have a sip of water. And I look forward to reading what you put there. Okay, so while I'm waiting, keep typing away in there because I want to see your responses. But as we really start to dig into this whole concept of, we live in a really toxic world. We live in a world that is bombarding us with toxicity from all sorts of spaces and parts of our lives. That toxicity of the soul or the spirit that we talked about last night, where we have those wounds that then develop into our beliefs and then we live out those beliefs. We also have the toxicity of the mind, where we hear messages and we see things and we read things and we're listening to the news, or we're listening to reports, or we're listening to different types of broadcasts that are also feeding into our mind. So the perfect thing for this, for me, like the one that's coming through for me now, is hear something often enough and you'll believe it to be true. Hear something often enough and you believe it to be true. So if you're singing songs that are not songs that you would say, like it's not something that you would say to yourself, like it's not going to uplift you, it's not going to, speak to you in a way that is encouraging, or, there are some songs that like really tear you down. But then there are some songs that like really lift you up. So the example for me in this, the song that lifts me up is This Is Me. This Is Me, from The Greatest Showman. That song of like really embracing, this is who I am. You can throw stuff at me, it doesn't actually matter because I'm still going to be me, because I'm amazing and I'm wonderful for who I actually am. Like, the words of that song for me lift me up. And this is another important point, is that for somebody else, the words of that song may tear them down. The words of that song may be toxic for them. Because we all have different filters. We all have different maps, which is how we see the world. So as we're born, we kind of start to write this map for ourselves. And just like if we were, sailing around the island and drawing the structures and the features that we find along the way, we do the same things in our lives. As we go through our life from birth through it, and it actually happens before birth. Like, we start this off in utero, and some may even say it started well before then, and I would agree with them in some of those points. We start drawing on the map of our perception of what the world is. So as we go through toddlerhood, as we go through adolescence, as we go through adulthood, we go through being parents, everything that we go through is building the map of which we believe is the world. But actually, the map is only ever the map. It's never the destination. If you were bushwalking, you might have a map with you that shows you and guides you and directs you in which way to go. But the map is not the bush. The bush is the bush. The map is just a representation of the bush. And we create our map, which is our representation of how the world works and how it functions and what we believe to be true around it. We build that by the experiences that we are exposed to, the music that we are around, the movies that we watch, the news stories that we're a part of, the documentaries that we engage in. There are all sorts of, like, I can't talk about documentaries without thinking about, there are some specific ones on the market that have encouraged people to eat in a particular way that's not necessarily beneficial for them based on some faulty research. Let me just say that. And that for me is like another area of toxicity where we're exposed to information and knowledge that's not necessarily true, based on maybe the bias of the researchers, the bias of the documentation people, all of that. Everything is created out of somebody else's map and filter. And so in order to come back to this place where we're eliminating and we're removing and we're deep cleaning and detoxing our lives from the toxicity that's around us, we have to look at those areas where we're receiving and getting messages. And it is so, like, it's in so many areas of our life. Like, I'm talking about the media and the information that's coming in, but it also comes in from the way that we perceive when we're buying clothes or we're looking at clothes, when we are buying bedding, and if we buy bedding, if we're allowed to buy those bedding, if we are hearing messages from all sorts of different places. Our job is not to just accept the message. Our job is always to connect with the message and then decide if that's something we want to accept or reject, or if there's parts of that that we want to take or parts of it we want to leave. And so it's really important for us, as we're doing the cleansing and the cleaning of our bodies, to also be really protective of our energy field, the information that comes into us, the people that we engage with and we listen to, the people and the songs and the movies and all of that that we also bring into our spirit. So I'm just going to check the comments here. Tanya is saying, so this will affect people suffering from mental illness even more. Absolutely. So here's a perfect example for me when it comes to, and this is not directly mental illness, this is just mood. So for me, when I had my experience that I shared about last night, when I went through that experience of being on life support and coming out of it, I was really traumatized by that. I had so much trauma and grieving in my body, it wasn't funny. You know, I was grieving so much during that time afterwards. And I was like, internally, my soul was in so much pain that I wanted to end my life. And I would have, like, my sole job for some days was to sit my butt on my chair and not get out of it, because I knew if I got up, I'd walk to the kitchen and I'd cut my wrists. I knew that that's where I was. And so my sole job for that day was to not leave that chair. Like, that's all I focused on. All I'm doing is I'm sitting on the chair. All I'm doing is I'm sitting on the chair. That's all I'm doing today. I'm just sitting on the chair. And I had some people that would come to my house and they would criticize that, you know, I hadn't moved enough. And I'm like, you don't understand that me not moving today is meaning I still live today. Because I know that I cannot fight the temptation and the urge to go end my life if I stand up. It's really interesting how we have this internal stuff that's going on, but again, we're not necessarily communicating it, because I couldn't say that to those people because they couldn't handle me saying that to those people. But some days, that's what it was like for me. And as I started to walk myself through that process of reclaiming who I was and re-engaging with who I am, I started to force myself, and it might sound funny to say this, but I forced myself to watch comedy shows. I would play them and I would be like half the time, like, you know, hardly even present to them. But then occasionally that comedian would say something that would just make me laugh a little. That would just make me laugh enough that for a split second I would get like a hit of dopamine, or I'd get a hit of serotonin that made me feel good and feel alive for that second. The other thing that I did was, because I'm as I was getting better, what I did is I moved down stages of killing myself. So instead of like killing myself with the knife, I went to like, I'm going to kill myself with food. And one of the things that I would do is I'd go to the supermarket and I would buy the Cadbury's chocolate that had the little candy, popping candy in it. And I would sit in the car and I was eating it with every intention that this was going to kill me because I was going to give myself cancer, and like that was it. You know, I'm going to die in an acceptable way. That was what I'd told myself at that point, that I'm going to choose a method that people won't blame me for dying. Like if I kill myself, people will go, oh, she had so much to live for and she's been selfish. Like, you know, that's what was going through my head at the time. So I was like, okay, I've got this figured out. I either need to die in a car crash or I need to die in a way where people won't blame me. Like nobody blames the cancer victim for dying. So if I give myself cancer, then nobody's going to blame me for dying and leaving all these children behind. Well, they might, but in my logical thinking at that time, it wasn't present. And so I would sit in the car and I would eat this popping candy. And it was just this weird thing where I ate it because I was trying to kill myself. But at the same time, the popping candy sensation in my mouth made me kind of come alive. And it would kind of light me up a little bit, because it would remind me of things like childhood. And you know, that process in my life was what I call decisions deferred, where I just made enough decisions to defer the big decision of ending my life, enough to get me through to the next day, to the next week, to the next month, to get to the place where I actually was like, that's it, my lioness is coming out. She's sick of this whinging. You're not whining anymore, Christina. We're going to get busy and we're going to get doing the things that are going to make you healthy and well, because you know how to do that. But I had to defer my decision enough to get to that point. And I would do little things that actually would make me catch myself out, where I would catch myself in a moment of joy. I would catch myself in a moment of like just childlike excitement about something. And that was enough to keep me going, enough to lift me up, enough to keep bringing me up. But I also knew that I couldn't sit and listen to like music that was depressing, because I was already way too depressed for any of that. I knew that I couldn't listen to any of those things. And I knew that I just had to keep putting on things that were going to lift me up and, you know, maybe make me laugh, make me smile, and have lots of conversations. Like I talked to so many of my fellow Accreta sisters during that period of time, where we just talked and talked and talked, and I'd be up until like 2 o'clock. Like I'd literally have to pass out to be able to go to sleep. And, you know, sometimes I'd wake up and my hand was still on the computer or on my phone where I'd been typing to somebody, and then like I'd fallen asleep and the phone had hit me on the face or whatever. But it was what I needed to get myself through that moment of like absolute gut-wrenching grief and turmoil. But the key element there was I knew in the back of my mind that I had to also be really protective of my energy. So we don't have a TV in the house. We have a TV now. We've got one now. But it is only used for selecting what we want to put on it. So it's not connected to a free-to-air TV station. We usually use YouTube, where I'm specifically looking for the thing that I want to be watching, the thing that I want to engage in. And that doesn't mean that I don't also then watch like Netflix and zone out to things. I totally do that as well. But I'm far more conscious than I am zoning. And even when I'm zoning, I'm generally picking stuff that I know is maybe nice and pleasant. Like I might watch a cooking show where I can kind of zone out to that and then, you know, maybe engage with some of the cooking that's going on. So it's absolutely important for people with mental health issues to be extra protective of the energy that is surrounding them. So turning off the like, don't buy the newspaper, don't turn on the news station, don't listen to those things. Like, maybe have a friend who you go, hey buddy, I can't listen to that because I know that that's putting me in a space of anxiety and stress and worry. Can you just tell me if there's anything I actually need to know? Like, I'm not allowed to leave the house. Can you just tell me if that stuff is coming? And I'm just going to trust that you've got me in this, as opposed to listening to every news update about, cases of something going on. I could talk a whole thing about that, but I'm probably not allowed to. So let's keep this COVID friendly. Okay, so Rachel is saying, yes, resonates for sure. I have realized a while back how much toxicity we are exposed to, what we listen to, what we watch. Love listening to you as a confirmation and reminder. Thank you so much. Beautiful. Kathy is saying, definitely see so much this year where people are hearing things and it's becoming their truth. Absolutely, absolutely. Like, it's really easy to see that for most people. Well, actually, I wouldn't say for most people, because actually there's a lot of people that have taken on some information and are doing things that they would never have done ever before, and used it as permission to excuse some of the behavior that they're currently doing as a fear-based behavior versus being that generous, loving, kind person that they actually normally were any other year. Kathy's also saying social media advertising throws so much information at us. It can get under the skin without us even realizing it. Need to be so aware. Absolutely. And that's where we want to make sure that, even with our social media feeds, that we are curators of our own social media feed. So it doesn't mean that you don't continue to access Facebook or you don't continue to engage with your friends in these spaces. It just means you curate them. So, you put the people that you want to see most first. You turn off the people who are talking about things that are like really not so great for you right now. And you might stumble upon them and see them in other spaces, and that's totally cool. But you're curating your feed. You're engaging in pages that are going to lift you up. You're engaging in content that is nourishing for you, that's, maybe challenging you sometimes, because a challenge is actually quite good for us. That you're actually curating those things as opposed to just scrolling and accepting whatever comes your way. And the same thing about that is the subliminal messages. So one of the things that really jumps out at me all the time is, I think his name is Brian Brown. I might have that wrong. I think it's Brian Brown. I think I've not quite got it right. So if anyone figures out who I mean, put it into the comments. But he does mentalism. So he's a mentalist, and essentially he's really spent a lot of time figuring out the conditioning of the human person. So how to get somebody to actually do something that they wouldn't actually normally do. So he's created a documentary that's called like Push, where he's taken, I think it was like 5 people or 4 people along this journey where he takes them through this scenario, and he's in the background and he's talking into the ears of the people that are with them, and telling them what to say. And he's set up this whole scenario. So they've done things like put posters on walls. They've even picked the colors of the walls. They've put little signs and maps around, and they've done all these little touch points that when the person gets led through this experience, by the end of it, they are doing the thing. And in Push, it was to get that person to the point where they would push somebody off a building. And 3 out of the 4 people actually pushed somebody off the building. And they normally would never have done that in their normal life. But the messaging through the pictures that were on the wall, the music that was playing, the elevator song that was coming on, all of that was conditioned to help lead them along that journey of getting to the point of doing something that they wouldn't normally do. There's another one as well where Will Smith is in this movie where he and this chick, again, I can't, like, this is me, I'm not fantastic at recalling the names of these things, but he's in this movie where she's a pickpocket, and he's kind of essentially got like a group of thieves with him. And so the group of thieves, they create lots of scenarios where they steal jewelry and they do all these types of things. And there's this one time where he's betting on this sport, the outcome of this sports game with this guy, and betting some very serious money. And the girl that is with him, she's not in on, like, she is not in on this particular job. She didn't realize it was a job. She just thought she was actually there to enjoy the sports game with him. And so they get into this daring and this betting type scenario. And they bet this guy that he can't guess the next person who's going to kick, or, you know, all of these things. And they get to this point where it's like all or nothing. And Will Smith's character is like down and he's not making the money. And like the girlfriend's going, come on, walk away. You're giving this guy all of our money, this hard earned money that we did from stealing from these people. You're giving this to them. And he's like, no, I'm doing it. All or nothing, double or nothing. Pick somebody on the field and I bet she can tell you who it is. And so they go through this whole scenario and she's like, oh my God, what? Why am I picking a number? What she doesn't know, and what the guy who's betting against him doesn't know, is that Will Smith's character has rigged the game, in the sense that they knew that they were aiming to get to this point. And so they put him in the hotel room that had the exact number that they wanted him to pick. They had signs everywhere that had the exact number that they wanted him to pick. They played music that had songs with the exact number in it that they wanted him to pick. They also had, because he was Asian, that also had Chinese proverbs and things like that were the exact number that they wanted him to pick. They'd also then set up earlier in the day that the guy who was going to be wearing the exact number that they wanted him to pick, that he was around, and this guy saw him several times that day. And so then when he saw him on the field, his brain subconsciously chose the thing that was most familiar to him, which was the number that he'd seen all that day, which was the color that he'd been hearing and, you know, had visually put around him that day. And then the man that was wearing the number that he had visually around him that day. And then, of course, when the girl looked upon the field and she saw the guy, because he was one of their teammates, she went, oh, I know now. And she picked the right person because she could recognize him. And she's like, ah, okay, I know who this is. And she said the right thing. And of course they won all the money, and, you know, it was all of that. But essentially that sort of stuff is actually true. That when we have subliminal messages around us, when we have things around us that are not for us but necessarily like are actually against us, when we have newspaper articles, when we have billboards, when we have signs, when we have advertisements, when we have, even on Facebook, where we have like the little scroll thing that's trying to sell us stuff, like when we have all those things, we see something often enough, we think that it's us choosing it, but we've seen it enough that it is now familiar to us. And as it's familiar to us, we then start to be more open to accepting it and choosing it. That sort of stuff happens for us in all of our life. And as we're starting to look at this idea of the toxic world that we're living in, the toxic mind that we're being exposed to, we are also needing to start to look at what are we putting in our environment, like our homes. Our homes are the environment in which we have the opportunity to give ourselves the best messaging possible. Where if we're in our homes longer than we're out of them, and we've got beautiful words that are on our walls, we've got pictures that are like vibrant and uplifting us, we've got things that make us feel comfortable and cozy, and we've got lots of loving stuff around us, then we feel really loving and cozy in that space, and we feel protected and safe. And then if we start to be conscious consumers of what we are watching, what we are hearing, what we're intellectually engaging in, and it doesn't mean you don't ever read something that you don't agree with. It's like that you consciously read it and you ask the questions that you need to ask, and that you allow yourself to have the communication there. So when we're thinking about the toxicity of the mind, we're looking at all of those areas. So I'm just going to read through some of these comments again. Rachel is saying, wow, that's very scary. It is very scary, but it's also really interesting to go and watch. And so if you go and watch, I think Netflix still has it, where it's called Push. You can also find him on things like YouTube, etc. And it's really interesting to watch how he's doing the things that he's doing, and then realizing that how much of our lives have we been set up to accept the status quo, to accept the things that we've been seen and we've heard and we've, been led to believe are actually the truth, when maybe they are not the truth at all. They're just the illusion of truth. It's really interesting in helping to expand our ideas on this concept. Because when we actually bring awareness to this, we can do something about it. When we're fully unconsciously aware of any of this, we have very limited ability to do anything about it. But when we bring conscious awareness to it, we have much greater ability to be aware of it. So Kathy is saying, interesting and very frightening that we are so susceptible. Absolutely. And we are even more susceptible when we are under 8. 7 or 8. There's a little bit of debate whether it's 7 or whether it's 8. But under that, we're functioning on beta waves, where we're just accepting information. We're accepting what people are telling us. We're accepting the messaging that we're receiving from the world around us. We're accepting that to be the truth about us. After that, we start to develop in our brain some levels of critical thinking, where we're able to start to think about what we're being presented with and start to go, well, I don't agree, or I do agree. And we start to look at it from different points of views. But essentially, as we talked about our bus yesterday, that driving, like what's driving our bus, those subconscious patterns that are driving our bus, those are created in those really early years based on the messaging that we received in those early years. And then in the later years, we're creating the evidence that backs up what we believe to be true around the world. Okay, so I'm going to read Tanya's. People are messaging it, adding on to it. So a while back, we were stopped at the traffic lights. The car next to us was playing the DUFF music, heavy metal. My child at the time was 8 and put their hands over their ears and began to cry out, "Stop it, stop it." All he could hear was "die, die, die" from the music in the car next to us. I could not hear it though. That's really interesting, and your child absolutely picked up on that there. I remember when we had 2 children and Faith was a baby, so this was a long time ago. It would have been 15 years ago at least now. And we went to Sydney because we were going to a conference that was there. And we didn't have a lot of money, so we kind of stayed in not necessarily the best places in Sydney. And we'd have to walk, we'd have to walk down the streets, and we'd have to catch the subway and all of this stuff. And it was really an interesting experience for us because there was a lot of graffiti, there was a lot of messages on the subway walls, and there were even in the actual train thing that we were on, there was a lot of like graffiti and damage and like just different messages and different stickers and all sorts of things that were up. And it was really interesting for us to walk through there because we weren't local. So it was all new, and we were highly aware of what was around us. We were very aware of our space because we were in the middle of King's Cross with 2 children, and we were highly aware of all the stuff that was going on around us, and we were able to see all of the things that everybody else just walked past. Everybody else was completely blind to the messaging that was on the wall. And for us, we like every day we would come out of there, we'd be so sad because of like seeing the different, death style messages that were on the wall, or the violent messages, or even just, walking through King's Cross and seeing, men hurting other men and, all of that type of stuff. Like, it was really sad for us, but then also noticing that the rest of the population were just walking past. They were just walking past, and it was part of their norm, and it was a part of their everyday experience to not see consciously the messaging that was coming at them all of the time. And our brains take in everything. We think that we don't because we can't recall it all, but our brains actually take on all of the information that is coming to us, whether it be through sight, sound, taste, etc. We receive all that messaging. And then what our brain does is it goes through this process of deleting, distorting, and generalizing. So it's deleting the things that aren't relevant to us at that time. It's distorting the things that don't match our current belief system. And it's generalizing things in order to put it into quick filing methods. So, for example, a generalization is that all men are like this, or all women are dot dot dot, or all dogs are blah blah blah. Like that generalization of all, everything, never. Those are the generalizations that our brain makes in order to limit the amount of information that comes to our conscious awareness. And it does that because if we actually were receptive to everything that came into our conscious awareness, we would be completely overloaded. We'd be completely overwhelmed with the amount of information that comes into us. And often that's one of the things that is happening for a lot of kids that might be on the spectrum or might be having experiences of ADHD, is that they're actually getting all of that information, or not all of it, but more of it than a lot of other people actually are. And so, the experience then challenges them, and, some of the behavior that we see coming out of that. And I'm generalizing here. Some of the behavior that we see coming out of that is actually based on this too much information is coming at them, and they're not able to do as much of the deleting and the distorting and the generalization that other brains do, in order so that they don't get overwhelmed with too much information coming their way. Any questions on this? I would be happy to answer them. I hope you're understanding and you're starting to pick up on it. I'm really like sifting over the top of this topic, because you can even go deeper in this, even to the point where you might look at the water that you're having and the messages on your water bottle. So I know there have been experiments where people have put water in glass jars, and on one message they've said like a really mean sort of thing, like die, death, horrible, and it's just been a word on the actual bottle. And then the other one is like life, beautiful, loving. And it's just, again, it's a message that's on the bottle that's got the water in it. And then that water is used to water the plants. And both the plants get the same amount of water. They get the same amount of sunshine. They get the same amount of everything. But they're getting water from these different bottles. And one's getting the water from the death message, and one's getting water from the life message. And the one that's getting the water from the life message continues to grow and thrive and does a beautiful job. But the one that's getting water from the death message starts to wither and recall and shrink and die. And how much of our lives are we getting that death message versus getting the life message? Like, if you are seriously engaging in, the news, then every time you're hearing that, you're getting a death message, because life doesn't actually sell newspapers. Death does, fear does, scare, hunger, shortage, scarcity, all of those things sell newspapers. Life stories don't usually sell newspapers as well. And so the message that you're getting there is what's going to sell, because the person producing the news, the person producing the newspaper, they've got a job. Their job is to sell newspapers. Their job is to sell the news. If they create news that nobody wants to watch, then they don't sell their advertising. If they put news in the newspapers that people aren't, attracted to, then they're not going to sell their newspapers, and they're not going to sell their advertising. So they eventually run out of business. So they put in the news, they highlight in the news the things that are going to sell it, the things that are going to make you watch it. And it is that death message, that fear message, because our brains are set up to look for fear, look for something going wrong. Like, our brain is actually set up for that, because it's part of our old traditional way. When we were living in the bush and we were hunters and gatherers, we had to be on alert. We had to be aware of when there was danger around. And so our brains are set up for that. So we're more attracted to where's the danger, where's the problem. And the media and the marketing and the psychologists have known this for a really long time. And they've been using that against us in order to make a profit. And so we have to reverse engineer that by being protective, by setting up boundaries. And we can look at this as a really negative thing. We can go, oh my God, it's so horrible that they've conditioned us to this way. Or we can choose the life-affirming message of going, Isn't it amazing that this overwhelming messaging has now brought me to a space of awareness, where I'm now moving to awareness, where I'm starting to decide what I'm going to participate in from a mental point of view, where I'm going to actively choose what I'm bringing into my energy field and what I'm bringing into my space. We can look at the same thing as it being a terrible thing. And, you know, for me, there's elements where I think it's terrible and I don't like that people are being manipulated that way. But then there are elements of me that goes, if they wake up to it, though, they get to choose. They get to be active participants in what's going on in their life and what they're feeding their spirit and their mind and their body. Rachel's saying, oh, I keep meaning to do one of those experiments with my son, like speaking positivity and negativity to the plant. Yeah, well, I think it would be a really interesting experiment to do, Rachel. Melanie's saying, I've heard about the different types of music that affect plants, but I haven't heard about the words. It's quite profound. And it is. And so, you know, why not start putting things on your drink bottles? Like mine says hydrate. I didn't, where's the camera? I didn't choose that. It's on there. But I could go and scrub that off if I wanted to, or I could just start putting on their messages that are actually going to, you know, take me further to where I want to be going, so that I'm calling in and I'm attracting myself to the thing that I want in my life versus the things that I don't want in my life. If I'm constantly looking at, I just keep coming back to media because it's the most obvious one for me at the moment. But if I keep coming back to the media about how many cases of people have got this one thing and, you know, not looking at any other aspect, but oh my gosh, there's a case, and getting into that space of fear, then I'm not going to be able to attract the things that I want in my life. What I'm going to attract is the things I don't want in my life, because where our energy goes, our attention flows. So where our attention is, our energy is as well. I put that the wrong way around, but where our attention goes, our energy flows. And if we are got our attention on the things that are not beneficial, that are negative, that are pulling us down, that are not life affirming, that are not in the direction of where we actually want to go, we call more of that into our lives. We make ourselves more available to that in our lives. And so this is part of what Divinely Nourished is about, like getting really consciously aware of what it is that we're thinking, how we're feeling, and how we're feeding ourselves, so that we can choose the direction that we want to be going versus being subconscious participants in something we don't actually want. And that's what divine nourishment is about. It's about being nourished in all the parts of your life, not just the one in one area. Because if you're just nourished in your food, eventually that's going to crumble too. Because you need your soul and your spirit to be nourished. You need your mind to be nourished. And you need your body to be nourished in order to be walking in divine health. All right. What else have we got here? Oh, you love the idea of messages on the water bottle. Actually, I just came up with that idea right now, and I think I'm going to actually do it too, because I've got some things that I want to achieve. So I think I'm going to start adding them onto my water bottle. Kathy is saying, my phone screen says you are amazing. You are amazing. You totally are amazing. You're so amazing. It's such a privilege to have a conversation with you. Rachel is saying, I guess that's like giving a blessing over your food. Grace, absolutely. Absolutely. It's all of that. So there we go. This is what the book is about. This is what the course is about. If you want to do the book in real life with me, come join the course. We're starting on the 25th. I will put the link up in the comments eventually, and I am definitely welcoming you into that space. I want to see as many beautiful faces in there as possible. The feedback that you give me in that course as we do our group coaching together is likely to alter some of the stuff that I put in the book. So I can see some of the beautiful people here who are watching it have already joined, and I can't wait to start working with them on this. And you're welcome to join me too. You're very, very welcome to join me. This will be the cheapest it ever is. It is $99 just for the course. If you want to do private coaching with me on top of that, there is a VIP option, but this will be the cheapest it ever will be. $99 to have 12 weeks of me group coaching you through the experience of looking at each of the 3 areas. It's likely to be more like $900 the next time I run it. So there is going to be a big difference between that. So if you're thinking that this is calling you, now is the time to actually join and participate in this. And you will, of course, have it forever and ever after that. I will definitely put the link into this page. If you're looking for it, though, if you just click on my name and go to the header, there will be like my big beautiful banner that says Divinely Nourished, and the link is in there as well. But I will put that into the comments here too as well. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow as we look at the toxicity of the body and the physical world that we live in. I'm essentially presenting the areas that we're going to be looking at, healing and working through and untangling so that we can be divinely nourished. All right. Bye for now. Have an amazing day, and I will catch you tomorrow. See you later.